So moved. Second.
Got a motion second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Next, we'll turn it over to Fred, and he can start his spiel.
So we need to do the minutes now? Do the minutes.
Oh, I forgot the minutes. Let me check it out. Finance,
Motion to approve minutes. Second.
all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Alan.
Can't get started until Jill makes sure the recorder's working. One time it didn't, she let me know about it. Anyway, I'm reviewing the balance sheet as of January 31st, so all the sheets presented with one exception will be as of the end of January. That will become significant as I speak later on in the presentation. Cash checking and interest account is at $68.3 million. Cash in terms of the North Carolina Capital Management Trust Fund is at 13, let's call it 13.8. And the accounts receivable and Medicaid waiver does stand at 11.4. And there I do have to stop and talk about that a bit. January was an unusual month for a bunch of reasons, and there was a net increase in the accounts receivable by about $6 million. The explanation is two or threefold. One is there was a significant error made in the month of January by DMA in reference to claims processing. There was an indicator that was not working. It was for all LMEs and COs, so we were all underpaid in the month of January. Since that time, it's been rectified and payment was made in February to correct what was not paid in January, but it was a significant amount. It was in excess of $3 million for that one error alone. In addition to that, this is not with an allowance for doubtful accounts. That has not been considered in this. Since in the month of February, we collected 93% of what we had been owed in the last several months. It is deemed appropriate that all of accounts receivable are indeed collectible, so therefore there's full recognition of it. So it's strange, you're fully recognizing accounts receivable and the accounts receivable goes up, but take my word for it, that is correct and it is true. And the February statements will support my comments as they proceed through the course of the year. The risk reserve, where is that? Risk reserve stands at $15.76 million. That is assessed at 2% of the Medicaid revenue received to date in this fiscal year. Going to the liabilities part of the balance sheet, accounts payable stands at 9.19 or 9.2, rounding up, and accounts payable IBNR Medicaid at 17.28 or 17.3 million. Going to the fund balance section, current year Medicaid, and here is earnings under the current year for Medicaid as of January 31st. It stands at $6.5 million. Prior year Medicaid at $23.3 million, and prior year other sources of funds at $21.4 million. Any questions about the balance sheet? Okay. Going to the next more detailed sheet, and this is the analysis of revenues and expenditures. I will focus on just three columns as presented here. Going to the left side of the sheet on Medicaid, and I'm talking about column 5 under total Medicaid. The service revenue stands at $149.5 million. Total service expense as of January 31st at $145.9. Oh, I misread it, so correct me. Service revenue is $149.5. Service expense at $145.9. So revenue over expense net stands at $3.5 million on the service side. On the administrative side, revenue stands at 20.2 million, administrative expense at 17.2, for a net revenue over expense of approximately $3 million. So going to the bottom of the column, the net revenue over expense under the Medicaid program itself, rounding up, is at 6.5 million. Going to state and federal, and this is the third column, total state and federal. Total service revenue, which is the top part of the sheet, is at 33.8 million. Service expense at 31.1, so net revenue over expense on the service side of 2.7 million, rounding up. On the administrative side, administrative revenue of about 3.2 million, administrative expense of just under 3.6. So yes, there is a net expense over revenue of about 346,000 year to date on the state and federal side. So net revenue over expense overall on the state and federal side stands at about $6.3 million. So going to the final column, and this is all sources of funds, rolling off from the previous column, is total service revenue. This is adding up Medicaid as well as state and federal and other sources at 187 million, expenses of 180.5 million, with a net revenue over expense of approximately, rounding up, 6.5 million. On the administrative side, revenue of 23.9 million. On the expense side, 20.7 million. So a net revenue over expense overall year to date of 3.2. So totaling, going all the way to the bottom of the sheet, net revenue over expense year to date of 9.7 million. Any questions on any portion of this sheet? Next, we go to the clinical services budget on the Medicaid side. As you may recollect, this bounces up and down depending on what individual service you're talking about from month to month. However, there are some general things that carry forward as themes year to date throughout the year. While total revenue over expense for Medicaid as a whole is on the positive side of the equation, which stands at approximately 1.84 million, its distribution is always at issue. The distribution here, as we've received on the Medicaid Part B side, that has shrunk as far as losses to date somewhat, as I had previously indicated would be. It has also shrunk somewhat on the innovation side. This is in full recognition of the additional revenue that was recognized by the addendum that the board had passed back in January. So this reflects some of those changes. However, there are issues with certain service lines that will continue throughout the year, and that is inpatient, some on the intensive, in-home, certainly on PTRS services, which has been tightly monitored and I think will bend to being closer to even by the end of the year, but does need some constant attending to. And quite frankly, we are underutilized, but do have plans to address the 1915 B3 related services, which we are way underexpended for the year as a whole. That is a pattern among the other LMEs, MCOs. Many of the services that fit under that category are new as of this year, and it's taken all of us some time to adjust to get those services pushed out the door. Any questions in regards to that sheet? Okay. I will go through some, but not necessarily all of the dashboards. The first presentation is on the medical expense ratio. Recall, this is the ratio of expenses for Medicaid over revenue for Medicaid. What you always want to be is in the middle of those two lines, close to the blue, but certainly not over it. So we stand for Medicaid services at about 98%, thereabouts. For state and federal funds, for the first time, and this is recognition, I think, of some of the contract adjustments that have been made year to date, we are moving into where we should be, which is in the 90 to the 100% bracket, standing at approximately 92% as far as the medical expense ratio is concerned.
You know, that makes Christina happy. She don't have to take personnel action.
Now, that's a closed session discussion.
I take you seriously.
Now I'm moving to the Medicaid current ratios. Again, current ratios are assets, current assets over current liabilities. What you always want to see is one or better as a established, consistent pattern. On the Medicaid side, we have a current ratio of 2.49 currently for the month of January, and under total for all sources of 3.59. Both are very, very healthy, and this is a good thing that this is sustained, and as would show from the beginning of the waiver, it has trended up as of the, let's call it the middle of last fiscal year, and has maintained at above the approximately 2.5 or above ratio throughout that period of time. Questions about that? Just some of the highlights of some of the other dashboards, and I'm looking at Medicaid paid claims year-to-date budget versus year-to-date actual. Here, one would look at the number of claims in which there are issues, which reinforces the clinical services piece that you saw the numbers here earlier. And you certainly see at issue inpatient, and you certainly see at issue overall for innovation. Please keep in mind, when you're looking at claims, it gives you a slightly different picture than the previous dashboard that had been reviewed. But it is consistent with some of the services that we have issues with, which has been consistent throughout the year. Now going to the pie chart, Medicaid services by service category. This has remained pretty much consistent throughout the year, and is a thing that Christina has reminded the board about, and that is 52% of everything that goes out the door is for innovations and intermediate care for MR. Those two services account for 52% of the business that we have. Shifting to the other pie chart, Medicaid service expense by category of aid. There are 3 disability categories that predominate services to the community as a whole. That is blind and disabled 21+, innovations, and AFTC 3+. Those 3 categories alone account for 83% of the pie. And that is pretty consistent. I will skip some of the others and go to page 7, which is the Medicaid services revenue. This is year-to-date for January budget versus actual. Here, one would see those adjustments in which actual revenue exceeded what we originally budgeted at the beginning of the year. Overall, that's a good thing. In all categories, we have received an increase of revenue over what we had budgeted, with the exception of Medicaid C, and that's innovation, consistent being pretty much throughout. However, for all Medicaid services, we have had revenue over expense by approximately $1 million.
This is 7 months.
This is 7 months. The one dashboard, and I'm going to page 8, this is new as far as the board has seen it. It's called the Medicaid Defense Interval. It's a calculation. It is for the revenue that we have. we didn't receive an additional dime for DMA, so cash on hand, how many days with the money that goes out the door to support the Medicaid program could we, Smokey, survive? That's what this is a graph of. How many days could we support ourselves with the cash that we have on hand? And it currently stands at 64.
What's a good number?
Hmm?
What's the number you want?
Hey, anything over 40 is wonderful. Because in essence, what it means is, if DMA, which has been known to occur, skips a payment or makes a significant error on the payment, we can still meet our obligations. Questions on any of the financials or the dashboard? Okay. I'll talk about Ridgefield then a bit. There's a summary of expenses to date. The to date, however, is as of the end of February. This is the one exception in terms of the financials that were presented. So these are expenses as of the end of February. So that all prepaid deposits are shown here. We did have a security deposit when we first signed the lease. There is an improvement deposit, meaning that before any of the work was done, we did have to advance certain payments, and then the work will be against that advance as it proceeds. The security system, there was a deposit made for proceed with that work. Vero is our computer networking vendor, as well as computer equipment and advanced business equipment. The expenses to date, as of the end of February, are here by category. Professional services at $24.6 thousand, miscellaneous expenses of only $108,000, MIS expenses of over $378,000, building instruction, leasehold improvements over $480,000, and office furniture almost $189,000. So year to date, in terms of cash disbursement and other related commitments, we stand at $1.3 million. But we're almost to the end. Question? Then I'll shift subjects a little bit and talk about the governor's budget proposal as it affects mental health, developmental disabilities, and substance abuse related services. There is a summary provided in the packet from the MC Council.
Excuse me, it's in the board packet.
It looks like this. As far as new community initiatives, there's the Department of Justice that $7.8 million is being added. There's a biennial budget process, so we're talking about 15.5 overall. NC Start, they're adding about 2.3 million. Task, 1.8. We are a recipient of the Behavioral Health Urgent Care Facility-Based Crisis Units. We are one of 4 LMEs, MCOs that have a piece of that. What I would say is that is it a good thing to have a uptick in reference to the funding of community-based services? And I would say yes. However, let's look at the overall picture. Let's look at our dear friends in state-operated care and what they get in reference to the provision of services. So Brock, 16.5 million. Inflation increases for the operations of the state hospitals, 2.8 and 3.1. So chronic shortfalls, 8.4 and 8.4. And three-way hospitals, which is another fancy way of saying these are payments that the state makes to accommodate the reduction in psychiatric beds that are available on the state operated system and to prevent the further contraction of the availability of private psychiatric hospitals in the private system. And that increases by 9.8. delivery is concerned, it is a small segment of the overall expansion in reference to services for MHSA and developmental disabilities as a whole.
Remember, excuse me a second, but Rick, do you remember, I think I made this comment, at the county mental health task force meeting about, and Fred has this, and I guess we can talk about it here with the full board. The total reduction in the last, I don't know, was it 12 years or something, is on the order of $500 million in state-funded mental health services. Well, they put other monies in, but they're very categorical as opposed to, single stream, which is the broadest funding that we can use kind of across the board. All of these things are a little bit here and a little bit there. And of course, Courtney had gotten to the meeting by that time, and she chimed in and talked about all the things they had added this year. Well, good for us, because we get that crisis services funding, but other than that, I'm not sure what else. The three-way funding is really a good thing for us. It's the methodology, and the way it's done is an anachronism. It's just a weird thing that the state did at some point, and we can't get by it, but those are important beds to the system. But other than that, I don't know, will we see any, what's the IDD?
NC Star?
Yeah, will we see any NC Star increase funding for us, do you
Yes.
think?
There's an appropriation for it. Whether we will see a part of it, that's another story.
Yeah.
If
So,
that
I mean, when you
doesn't
come
matter.
right down to it, very fortunate to get the $2 million for the crisis initiative funding. Other than that,
No.
I mean, three-way beds hopefully, and I don't know, I asked, Craig, and folks will be here later to try to talk about, I haven't heard anything about a methodology for how those increases could be done. But,
Operator rate in 12 years.
isn't that, is that what it is in ballpark, Fred?
Well, there are different ways of looking at it.
Mhm.
Okay. So the summary that I have, and this is for community services programs only, from July of 2004 to the present, there was a net increase of 51 million. However, when you look at the period from July of 2009 to the present, a la the beginning of the Great Recession, there's a shrinkage in available community services programming of 31.5 million. So we're not anywhere close to catching up to where we were 6 years ago.
What's the big number on the, we total up all the reductions? Where that is, that's in the board packet. That spreadsheet tab?
Is this the one you,
Yeah.
You want
So
that?
all the red,
yeah, there are a lot.
if you do all the red, what's the, you're
You want me to
doing the
pass
net?
They just give a net figure here of a negative 31.
Mhm.
Do you want me to pass that in?
Yeah, you might as well. What's not talked about here is in 2009, fiscal year 2010, there was a reduction in community service programming of 75 million, and the assistant has never seen those numbers.
Yeah, I see 500, 50, let's see. Funding, someone, $402 million down on the bottom. Yeah, I had a hard time, that's what I wanted to try to be the expert in, Brett, trying to understand how this was all put together.
Well, this is a walk up and it's a walk down. Essentially using fiscal year 2005 5 as a base. They added and subtracted anything that was to the state budget as far as those three areas, IDD, SA, and mental health, and where it nets out to. In the two boxes on the bottom, then, they not only compare what the increases and the decreases are, depending on the time period you're talking about, but from an inflationary point of view, for the period, what you would have had to add to maintain purchasing power for services. And in both cases, there was an actual decline in purchasing power, regardless of how you want to look at it. So yes, there was a net increase in funds from 2004 to 2015, an 11-year period, but when you take that difference of 51 million versus what it would have taken, which is 103, there was a net decrease of the system in terms of purchasing power in excess of $50 million. When you look at the period from 2009 to the present, literally speaking, it's even more embarrassing.
So we lost 31 million, and really, to adjust it for inflation, you would have had to add another $51 million loss to it, so we're at about $100 million loss. Ballpark. Well, that makes sense to you. I know it's a little bit confusing. Yeah, those two boxes on the bottom.
Now, the other reality of looking at the figures is who the division in fact supports. And the majority of individuals within the system that the division in fact supports now are the uninsured. So what you see is a trending of the decreased commitment of state government for the uninsured who have disabilities. And there's no other way of putting it. And they're saying if you don't qualify for Medicaid, well, you're entitled to less.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about having Medicaid qualifies you as a have.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
It's all relative, right? Okay.
The hospital, it's the first thing they wanna do is get people eligible for Medicaid.
Thank you.
The only other subject I have to bring up, and unfortunately you haven't had a chance to talk about it, is Caldwell and the facility-based crisis urgent care center. It's anticipated by RHA to open there. We have received permission, authorization from the division to utilize $320,000 for the support of that facility-based crisis. However, we don't have board motion to approve the expenditure of those funds in that regard. And this is to account for the differences in the expense of the project versus the revenue available.
You know, this is to be determined.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
You know, we need to circle back with.
I am.
Okay. Okay.
So just to, in Sean's office, if he's not received them, he should receive them in the next week or two. They have the black and white sketches of the whole building, I mean, all the rooms, they've done all the detail. I looked at those drawings and stuff about a week ago. So, the architects from where they come out, he'll get full-blown color, pictures of everything literally inside of all that. So at that point, I guess it's a matter of whenever your board, the Foothills board, whoever boarded it, I guess have done whatever processes you're going through, and you're ready to have that conversation. The architects and folks are more than ready to come out, all the drawings and everything are done. I haven't heard the date of when they do the groundbreaking for that. And I don't know, Fred, if you have either, so, but they are, way into the process, so. So I would assume, I think Brian and Tracy and people's been involved in that for some of your processes. So they're ready whenever you are. I would just leave it at that. So,
Okay.
okay.
You have anything else?
report, or?
Except the financial.
In this meeting, the regular meeting.
In this one, for you to then make the
Just the
recommendation.
Yeah.
recommend it to the other,
We have a recommendation to, present this to the full board.
I'll make that motion. I'll second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. If nothing else,
I have one other thing that y'all might just wanna think about, is that Ed Carlton previously served as another
Coming
member
back?
of this committee. And so, when we have the vote tonight about adding the two new members to fill those vacancies, we're gonna have to address both the Quality and Performance Committee, Carl used to serve on that, and putting somebody else on this committee, because it'll help in terms of making sure we have a quorum.
Okay.
You have another member to fill that slot.
motion to adjourn.
So moved.